History Zone, where the past comes alive. Winter came without warning, and a town was buried alive. This is the story of survival.
I remember that morning because it felt like mercy. January 12th, 1888. The sun rose gentle over the plains of Dakota Territory, pale and honest, like it had nothing to hide. After weeks of iron-cold nights that froze breath in your beard and cracked wood like rifle fire, the warmth felt like forgiveness. Snow softened, roofs dripped, horses steamed quietly in their stalls. We trusted that sky. That was our first mistake. My name was Thomas Hale, and I was 34 years old that winter. I had a wife, a small farmhouse just outside town, and hands so used to cold they no longer trembled. I had survived prairie fires, drought, and winters that killed cattle by the dozens. I believed I understood storms. That morning, I walked into town without my heavy coat. Men laughed about it at the mercantile. Women sent children to school with mittens instead of fur-lined gloves. The air was calm, unnaturally calm, and warm enough that you could smell damp earth beneath the snow. If you'd asked any of us, we'd have sworn winter was loosening its grip. By mid-morning, the sky changed. Not dramatically, no thunder, no warning, just a slow whitening at the horizon, like someone erasing the world with chalk. I was helping unload grain when the wind arrived, not howling, not screaming, but sharp, sudden, and cold enough to steal breath straight from the lungs. In less than a minute, the temperature dropped so fast my eyelashes crusted with ice. The warmth vanished like it had never existed. Someone shouted, someone else ran. The snow didn't fall at first, it charged, horizontal, violent, blinding, the kind that scrapes skin raw and makes every direction look the same. Buildings disappeared 20 feet away. The Billtown bell rang once, twice, then went silent. I remember thinking of the children, schoolhouses scattered across the prairie, one-room buildings, thin walls, teachers who believed, like the rest of us, that the day was safe. I pulled my scarf over my face and tried to move toward home. I didn't make it 10 steps. The wind knocked me sideways, slammed me against a hitching post, and tore the breath from my chest. Snow forced its way up my nose, into my eyes, down my collar. I couldn't tell sky from ground. I couldn't tell east from west. I crawled, hands numb in seconds, knees burning, every inch forward earned like a fight. I found the side of the general store by luck more than sense, and clung to it while the wind screamed around me. That's when I heard it, crying. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, curled beside the building, coat too thin, face already turning gray-blue. His name was Eli, though I didn't know it yet. He'd been sent home early when the teacher realized something was wrong. He'd never made it. I wrapped him inside my coat and pressed my face to his hair, breathing warmth into him like a dying fire. My hands didn't feel real anymore, neither did my feet. We couldn't move, not safely, so I did the only thing left. I waited. Minutes stretched into something else, something heavier. The storm didn't pause, it didn't weaken, it only grew louder, angrier, like it meant to erase us completely. I thought of my wife. I thought of the schoolhouse west of town. I thought of the lie that morning had told us. When the store door finally burst open, 3 men dragged us inside by our collars. Someone slammed the door shut, and the world went quiet except for wind clawing at the walls. People huddled together, faces white with fear, clothes stiff with ice. Frostbite bloomed on fingers and ears before our eyes. The windows iced solid within minutes, sealing us into darkness. Outside, the blizzard buried the town alive, and it wasn't done yet. The storm did not sound like wind anymore. It sounded alive. Inside the general store, the walls groaned as if something enormous pressed its weight against them. Snow forced itself through every crack, crawling across the floor like ash. The lamps burned low, their flames trembling, throwing long, nervous shadows across faces I had known my entire life. No one spoke above a whisper. Eli lay against my chest, his fingers white, stiff as wood. I rubbed them slowly, afraid that too much friction would shatter what little warmth remained. Across the room, a woman sobbed silently into her shawl. A man stared at his hands as if he didn't recognize them anymore. Someone tried the door once. The wind ripped it open a few inches and threw a wall of snow inside before 3 of us slammed it shut again. That was when we understood the truth. No one was going anywhere. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost its meaning when the windows disappeared behind ice and snow. The world beyond the store ceased to exist. There was only the sound of the blizzard and the growing cold creeping in from the floorboards. My thoughts kept drifting to the schoolhouses. There were more than a dozen scattered across the prairie, small, lonely buildings miles apart. Children inside them, teachers with chalk still on their fingers. Most of them had no storm cellar, no warning, no heavy coats. Around midday, if it was still day at all, the storm worsened. The temperature plunged again, so fast it felt like the air itself had teeth. Breath froze inside scarves, skin burned, then went numb. We piled crates against the walls and tore up burlap sacks to stuff into the cracks, but it felt useless, like trying to dam a river with bare hands. A man named Jacob Miller stood up suddenly. "My boy's out there," he said. "He walks home from the South School." No one stopped him fast enough. The door burst open. The wind took Jacob immediately, yanking him forward like a rag doll. He vanished into the white before any of us could grab his coat. Snow rushed in after him, coating the floor knee-deep in seconds. We shut the door. No one spoke his name again. That was the moment hope fractured. Late in the afternoon, if it was still afternoon, someone began pounding on the back wall. Weak, desperate. We hacked away ice from the door frame and dragged in 2 figures, half buried, barely alive. A young woman and a teenage girl, their faces blackened by frostbite, eyes glazed with shock. They had come from the West Schoolhouse. The teacher had dismissed the children too late. Visibility was already gone. The older students tried to lead the younger ones, forming a line, hands locked together. The wind tore them apart. Some fell and never got back up. Others walked in circles until their legs simply stopped working. The teacher had carried 2 children at once before collapsing herself. The girl in the store whispered names we didn't recognize. No one answered. Night came early, dragged in by the storm like a curtain. The lamps went out one by one as oil froze thick and useless. We huddled together in darkness, listening to the blizzard bury the building inch by inch. Eli stirred against me. "Is it over?" he asked. I lied. "Yes," I said. "Almost." But the storm had no mercy left to give. Sometime deep in the night, the wind eased, not stopped, just slowed enough to feel different. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, final, like the world holding its breath after a killing blow. At first light, if it could be called light, we forced the door open. The town was gone. Snow swallowed fences, houses were half buried, their roofs like tombstones. The main street was unrecognizable, just a smooth white plain where life had been hours before. And scattered across that plain were shapes, coats, boots, bodies, frozen where they fell. We found Jacob near the well, face down, hands stretched forward as if still reaching for something just out of sight. I stood there, unable to move, until someone touched my shoulder. "There are more," they said, "out by the schools." That was when I understood. The blizzard hadn't just trapped us, it had harvested the town.
We did not bury the dead that day. The cold would not allow it. At dawn, if dawn it was, the air burned worse than the storm itself. The wind had dropped, but the temperature had fallen even further, locking the world into a brittle, deadly stillness. Sound carried strangely, every step a sharp crunch, every breath a rasp that scraped the lungs raw. We wrapped our faces in rags and rope, tied ourselves together in pairs, and stepped into what had once been our town. The snow reached our waists in places. In others, it had scoured the ground clean, leaving frozen dirt and splintered wood behind. A wagon stood upright in the middle of the street, its horse missing entirely. A church steeple leaned like a broken finger pointing at the sky. We moved slowly, carefully. The dead were everywhere. Some lay as if sleeping, curled against fences or doorways. Others were twisted, arms flung wide, mouths open in silent screams that had frozen there. Frost had taken fingers, noses, ears, blackened and brittle as coal. In places, snow had covered them completely, leaving only a boot or sleeve sticking out, marking where a life had ended. I forced myself to keep walking. The first schoolhouse stood 2 miles west of town. Its door was half open, buried nearly to the top. We had to dig for almost an hour before we could squeeze inside. The room smelled of chalk and cold iron. Desks were overturned. A slate lay cracked on the floor, half covered in snow that had blown through the windows. We found the teacher first. She sat against the far wall, coat wrapped around her shoulders, arms empty. Her eyes were open, fixed on nothing. Her lips were blue, still shaped around words she would never finish. There were no children inside. We followed tracks leading away from the building, faint, broken lines swallowed by drifts and ice. 50 yards out, we found the first body, a little girl no older than 7, her dress stiff as wood, hands clenched into fists the size of walnuts. Then another, then 3 more. They had tried to stay together. We could see it in the way they lay, close, almost touching. One boy had fallen forward, arms stretched out, fingers frozen inches from the coat of the child ahead of him. I bent down and closed his eyes. My gloves stuck to his lashes. At the second schoolhouse, there was nothing left to find. The building itself had vanished, flattened, scattered, swallowed by snow and wind. We dug where we thought it had stood until our hands bled and our breath turned thin and desperate. We found bodies instead. Children piled together in a shallow depression, the teacher beneath them, her body forming a shield that had not been enough. She had wrapped herself around them, coat spread wide, back to the wind. It didn't matter. Cold does not care about bravery. By midday, our search parties began to thin, not because there were no more dead, but because men could no longer feel their feet.
Frostbite crept in silently, stealing fingers, toes, noses before pain ever arrived. We rotated groups back to town, knowing that every minute outside stole from us something we might never get back. I lost count of how many we found. 30, 40, more. Some had walked until they collapsed. Others had turned in circles, their tracks forming tight spirals in the snow, confusion made visible. One man had torn his coat open, chest bare to the sky, frozen madness etched into his face. The storm had broken minds before it took bodies. By evening, we stopped searching, not because we were done, but because there was no one left alive to find. That night, the church gathered in the church, the only building still standing firm. The pews filled with survivors, wrapped in blankets, their faces hollow, eyes red and unblinking. Children sat in silence, clinging to strangers because their parents would never come back. I sat alone near the back. Eli slept against my side, his breath steady now, his hands bandaged and pink with returning life. He had survived when so many had not, and I did not know how to feel about that. The preacher spoke, but his words floated past me, weightless and useless. Outside, the snow glowed pale beneath the moon, hiding everything the storm had done. That was when the guilt set in. Not survivor's guilt, something heavier. We had trusted the sky. We had believed winter would announce itself before killing us. We had been wrong, and the snow still had more secrets buried beneath it.
We buried no one for 3 days. The ground was frozen harder than iron. Picks rang against it like bells, sparks flashing in the pale light. Shovels snapped, hands bled. The dead waited, laid out in barns and churches, wrapped in quilts meant for warmth that would never come. There were too many small bodies. They were lined in rows, boots still dusted with snow, faces washed clean and waxy. Mothers knelt beside them, whispering names over and over, as if repetition alone could pull breath back into frozen lungs. Fathers stood rigid, hats crushed in their hands, staring at nothing. I helped carry them, one after another. Some weighed almost nothing. The preacher said words when the time finally came, but the sound vanished into the open air, stolen by the cold. No hymns were sung, voices would not rise. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The town had been cut open, not just by death, but by absence. School bells never rang again that winter. Desks sat empty, slates untouched. Boots by doorways belonged to children who would never outgrow them. Entire families were erased in a single afternoon. Names that would fade from memory faster than the snow would melt. Eli stayed with me. His parents had been found 3 miles south of town, frozen together behind a fence line, their coats wrapped around each other. No one told him right away. He knew anyway. Children always do. He did not cry. He just grew quieter. At night, I woke to hear him whispering to himself, listing the names of friends who had not come back. Sometimes he asked why the storm had come so fast. Sometimes he asked why the teachers let them go. I had no answers. None of us did. The newspapers arrived a week later, carried by men with frostbitten hands and haunted eyes. They called it the Children's Blizzard. They printed numbers, dead here, missing there, as if tallying cattle lost to disease. They said the storm had killed more than 200 across the plains.
We knew better. They did not count the unborn. They did not count the futures buried with those children. They did not count what it did to the ones left behind. The town never fully recovered. Some families packed what little they had and left, unable to sleep beneath the same sky that had betrayed them. Houses stood empty, windows dark, doors swinging in the wind long after spring came. Fields went untilled, laughter vanished. Winter still came every year, but we stopped trusting warm mornings. Years passed. I grew older. My hair thinned, my hands stiffened in ways that never fully healed. Eli grew tall under my roof, learned the weight of responsibility too young, learned to read storms with a fear I recognized. We never spoke about that day, not directly, but every January, when the air softened too quickly, when the snow began to melt before its time, we both looked to the horizon and waited. Because storms like that do not end. They wait. They wait in memory. They wait in silence. They wait for the moment you believe the sky again. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it. Not the wind, but the sound of footsteps fading into white. Children calling for help that never came. A town breathing its last beneath a lie of blue sky. The blizzard buried more than bodies. It buried innocence, and it taught us the most brutal lesson the plains can offer. Nature does not warn, it simply takes.
In the months that followed, the snow melted slowly, reluctantly, as if it wanted us to remember what it had done. When spring finally broke through the frozen earth, it revealed things we had missed. Bodies uncovered at the edges of fields, a child's shoe lodged in a fence, a lunch pail crushed beneath ice. Each discovery reopened wounds we had barely managed to close. But something else surfaced too. Change. Men began talking about weather in ways we never had before, not just as small talk, not as superstition, but as something to be studied. The blizzard had come without warning because we had no system to warn us, no signals, no understanding of what moved across the sky beyond what our bones told us. Bones, we learned, were not enough. Before that winter, forecasts came by telegraph days late, or not at all. Storms were judged by cloud shape, by wind direction, by the ache in old joints. After the children's blizzard, that felt like gambling with lives. Washington took notice. So did the Army Signal Corps, which handled weather reports at the time. They expanded observation stations. They trained men to read pressure changes, temperature drops, shifting winds. They began sending warnings faster, clearer, farther. It was too late for our children, but maybe not for the next ones. Eli watched all of this quietly. He listened when men spoke of barometers and telegraph lines. He asked questions. He learned the names of clouds, the way cold fronts moved like invisible walls across the plains. He grew into a man who never ignored the sky. Neither did I. Every winter after 1888, I prepared like the storm might return tomorrow. Extra coal, extra food, ropes between buildings, emergency shelters near the schools. Heavy coats kept close even on warm days. People said I worried too much. They hadn't seen what I'd seen. The blizzard taught us something else too, something harder to name. It taught us how thin the line is between ordinary life and disaster.
One morning you drink coffee and send your children to school. By nightfall, you are identifying bodies by boots and scarves. There is no gradual shift, only before and after. Years later, I stood on a hill overlooking the town, smaller now, quieter, and watched snow clouds gather in the distance. Eli stood beside me, his breath rising in steady white plumes. "Do you think it'll happen again?" he asked. I thought about the prairie, about how it remembers. "Yes," I said, "somewhere, someday." Storms like that do not belong to history alone. They belong to human forgetting. They return when we believe we are safe simply because we survived the last one. The children's blizzard changed weather science. It changed how schools handled storms. It changed emergency planning across the plains. But it also left a scar. Even now, when the temperature rises too fast in winter, I feel it in my chest, a tightening, a warning no instrument can measure. Because the sky still lies sometimes, and when it does so with terrible beauty. I tell this story now, not because I want to remember, but because I must, because the dead deserve more than numbers in a ledger, because children deserve more than trust placed in a calm morning. I was there. I saw a town buried alive, and I learned that survival is not just about enduring the storm. It's about listening before the wind speaks.
Fear does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it settles in quietly, like frost creeping across a window while you sleep. After the blizzard, the town functioned again. Stores reopened, fields were plowed, children returned to school under watchful eyes and heavy coats. On the surface, life continued. Inside us, something had changed forever. We no longer trusted calm. A warm winter morning no longer felt like relief, it felt like a warning. People paused mid-sentence to study the horizon. Conversations died when the wind shifted. Church services stopped early if clouds thickened, no matter the sermon. We had learned what sudden meant. I saw it in the children most of all. They flinched when snow began to fall sideways. They memorized evacuation routes the way other children memorized hymns. They kept their coats on hooks closest to the door, even on days when the sun shone, bright and false. Teachers never dismissed class again without a plan. Some kept ropes coiled beside the door, thick lines meant to tie children together if they had to move through whiteout conditions. Others built storm cellars with their own hands, digging into frozen earth because memory demanded it. We prepared not because we expected another storm, but because we knew one day it would come. Eli grew into a quiet man, strong, observant. He worked the land, but always with one eye on the sky. When pressure dropped suddenly, he felt it before the instruments did. When birds vanished, he noticed. The storm had shaped him. It had shaped all of us. Every January, on the anniversary of the blizzard, the town fell silent. No bells rang, no speeches were made. People simply stopped. They remembered names, they remembered faces, and then they moved on, because survival requires motion, even when the heart resists. Years later, I traveled east for work. In the cities, people laughed when I spoke of sudden storms. They trusted schedules. They trusted forecasts delivered too late to matter. I did not argue.
Some lessons can only be learned in snow. The blizzard had also changed the way I dreamed. In my sleep, I often found myself walking through endless white, calling names that echoed back to me, hollow and distant. Sometimes I reached someone just as the wind erased them. Other times I stood alone, buried up to my chest, unable to move as snow climbed higher. I woke every time before it took my breath. I was lucky, many were not. The storm left behind men who drank too much, women who never spoke again, children who grew old too early. Trauma was not a word we used then, but it lived in our homes, in our silences, in the way we watched the weather with almost religious devotion. We stopped believing the sky because belief had nearly killed us, and yet we kept living beneath it. That contradiction stayed with me. I understood then that survival is not triumph, it is adaptation. It is carrying fear forward without letting it freeze you in place. It is teaching the next generation, not panic, but awareness. One evening, many years later, Eli asked me something I had not expected. "Do you think those children felt afraid at the end?" he asked. I thought of the frozen faces, the way some had fallen holding hands. "No," I said finally. "I think they were confused and cold, and they trusted the adults to know what to do." He nodded slowly. That answer satisfied neither of us. The storm had taken their trust and buried it with them. All we could do was make sure we never asked for it blindly again.
Time has a way of softening sharp edges, but some things do not dull. The storm followed us, not in wind or snow, but in habit, in caution, in the way we watched the sky as if it might suddenly speak again. Long after the drifts melted and the fields greened, the blizzard remained, stitched into daily life like an old scar. I carried it with me everywhere, in how I packed for short trips, in how I checked the horizon before sunset, in how I never walked anywhere alone in winter if I could help it. Other towns forgot. We did not. Travelers passing through would comment on how prepared we were. Extra shelters, signal flags, food caches near schools. They called it overkill. They hadn't stood in a white void calling names that never answered. Memory made us different. As years passed, children who had never known the blizzard learned about it anyway, not from books, but from the way adults stiffened when the wind shifted, from the conversations paused when snow began falling too fast. Fear, passed down carefully, becomes wisdom. Eli married and built his own home not far from mine. He taught his children how to read clouds before they learned their letters. He showed them where to shelter, how to stay together, how to listen to silence. Sometimes I worried we were teaching them too much. Then I remembered the cost of teaching too little. On the 20th anniversary of the blizzard, a reporter came to town. He asked survivors to speak, to remember, to explain what it felt like. Most refused. I did not. I told him about the warmth, the lie of the sky, the way sound vanished inside the blizzard, the smell of frozen wool and oil lamps, the weight of a child growing still in your arms. He listened, he wrote, he left. The article ran for one day. The storm lasted forever. I learned then that history does not preserve pain, people do. That is why stories matter. Years later, another storm came, strong, sudden, but not as deadly. Warnings were sent in time, schools closed early, people stayed inside, no children died.
Afterwards, someone said, "We got lucky." I shook my head. We got prepared. The difference matters. As I grew older, my body slowed, but my memory sharpened. I remembered details I once thought lost, the way snow hissed across bare ground, the sound of boots frozen solid overnight, the way faces looked when hope finally failed. Those memories visited me often, not as nightmares, as reminders. One winter evening, Eli's youngest asked me if I was afraid of snow. I thought about it. "No," I said, "I'm afraid of forgetting what it can do." The child nodded, serious in a way only children can be when they sense truth beneath words. That is when I understood something important. The blizzard had not only taken lives, it had created witnesses. We were left behind not by accident, but by responsibility, to remember, to warn, to prepare. Storms will always come, climate will shift, nature will test us in ways we do not expect. The question is not whether the sky will lie again. It will. The question is whether we will listen when it does. Because some storms end when the snow stops falling, others end only when the last witness is gone.
Old age arrives the same way storms do, quietly at first, then all at once. By the time I realized how much of my life had passed, most of the people who remembered the blizzard were already gone. Graves filled with names spoken less often each year, houses emptied, voices faded. I became something I never asked to be, a witness. People came to me with questions, students, writers, strangers passing through town. They wanted facts, dates, numbers. They wanted the blizzard neatly contained, organized like a ledger entry. I gave them what they asked for, but what they needed was harder. They needed to understand how it felt to watch the world disappear in minutes, how helplessness settles in the bones, how survival leaves marks deeper than scars. I told them about Eli, how he survived by chance, how he grew into a man shaped by loss, how he taught his children caution without cruelty, fear without panic. I told them about the teachers, about courage that didn't save lives, but deserved remembering anyway. Sometimes, after the questions ended, people would sit in silence. Some cried, others stared at their hands like they had just noticed them for the first time. That was when I knew the story had landed where it mattered. Time thinned the town further. Railroads shifted, markets moved. Younger generations left for cities where storms felt distant and controllable. The prairie grew quieter, wider, lonelier. I stayed, because memory needs a place to live. Every winter, fewer candles were lit on the anniversary, fewer names spoken aloud. Eventually, there were none left who had been there, none except me. I walked the old paths alone. The schoolhouse sites were marked now, small plaques, simple words. In memory of the children lost, January 12, 1888. No description could capture the sound. No stone could carry the cold. Only voices could do that. My body betrayed me slowly. Hands shook, breath shortened, but my mind remained clear, sharp as winter air. I could still see that morning, the soft sun, the melting snow, the trust. Trust is fragile.
It breaks once and never fully returns. One evening, Eli sat beside me as snow fell gently outside. Not sideways, not violent, just enough to cover the ground. "Do you regret staying?" he asked. I thought of the graves, the empty houses, the stories told and untold. "No," I said. "If everyone leaves, the land forgets." He nodded. That night, I dreamed not of the storm, but of silence afterward. A world where no one remembered why the shelters were built, why the ropes hung by schoolhouse doors. A world where the sky lied again. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, cold despite the fire. That fear, that forgetting, felt worse than the storm itself. So I tell this story now as plainly as I can, not to frighten, not to accuse, but to remind. I was there. I survived. And survival carries responsibility. If you hear warmth in winter and feel relief, remember caution too. If the sky looks kind, remember how quickly it can change. Because storms do not need malice to kill. They need only trust.
The sky spoke again late in my life. Not with the sudden fury of 1888, but with the same quiet deception. It was another winter morning that felt too kind. Snow melting off the eaves, air soft enough to forget yourself in. I felt it before anyone else noticed. The pressure shift, the way the horizon dulled instead of darkened. The lie was familiar. I watched the town stir. Children walked toward school, coats unbuttoned. Shop doors stood open longer than usual. Laughter carried easily in the thin warmth. My chest tightened. I went to the schoolhouse myself. I did not wait for permission. I did not explain. I told the teacher what I felt. I showed her the sky, not the clouds, but the absence of definition, the stillness that meant something was moving fast and unseen. She listened. Classes were dismissed early. Parents grumbled, children cheered. People said I was being dramatic, that the old man was chasing ghosts. I did not argue. By afternoon, the wind arrived. Snow fell sideways, visibility vanished, but this time no one was caught walking home alone. No ropes were needed, no desperate searches were launched into white emptiness. The storm passed without blood. That night, as snow piled harmlessly against prepared doors, I sat by the fire and wept, not from fear, but from release. Something inside me finally loosened. The storm had come, and we had answered it. I realized then that the blizzard of 1888 had not only taught us how to survive, it had waited for us to prove we had learned. Survival is not avoiding danger forever. It is meeting it differently when it returns. Eli visited the next morning. He brought his children. They listened as the adults spoke about forecasts and warnings and preparation. To them, the storm was just weather, nothing more. That was the greatest victory of all. For the first time, winter did not carry bodies with it. As the day wore on, sunlight returned. Snow glittered clean and harmless across the fields. The land looked peaceful again, as it always does after devastation narrowly avoided. I walked outside slowly, leaning on my cane, and looked across the prairie. It was still beautiful. It was still dangerous. Both truths could exist at once. I knew then my time as a witness was nearly over. Others would take up the watching. Others would remember, or so I hoped.
Stories, like storms, move forward. They do not stop simply because one voice falls silent. That night, I sat down and began to write, not for newspapers, not for officials, but for whoever might listen someday. I wrote about warmth that lies, about silence that kills, about children who trusted adults to know better, and about the duty of those who survived. If you hear this story now, know this: you are already part of it. Every time you pause before trusting the sky, every time you choose caution over comfort, every time you remember those who came before, the storm speaks. Whether we listen decides who lives.
The snow fell, finally, for good that year, though I knew it never truly leaves. Winter returns, storms return, and even when the land is clear, the memory of cold and loss lingers like frost in the bones. I am old now. My hair is white as the drifts that swallowed our town, and my hands tremble when I write. But my voice remains, and my memory remains sharper than the edge of ice on a prairie morning. I often sit in the church where we buried so many children, staring at the pews that once held the living and the grieving alike. I see faces that have been gone for decades, children frozen mid-laugh, mothers clutching coats that no longer hold warmth, teachers standing brave against a storm they could not conquer. I see them and I speak their names aloud. The walls echo back faintly, carrying their presence into the quiet. Eli visits less now. His children grow taller than I ever expected, their curiosity brimming with questions about storms and survival. I tell them what I can. I tell them about preparation, about reading the wind, about trusting observation over optimism. And I tell them about courage, the kind that doesn't save everyone, but still matters. I tell them always that life is fragile, that beauty and danger can coexist, that the prairie, like the sky, is not something to be tamed, only respected. Some nights when the wind whines around the corners of my home, I imagine the blizzard returning, not fully, but in fragments, the sharp blast of cold, the whisper of children lost, the heavy silence of a town trapped under white. And each time I realize I am no longer afraid. I remember the preparation, the lessons, the lives we rebuilt afterward. I remember that survival is not luck, it is awareness, it is action, it is memory. The town, now smaller, still stands. Some families never returned after the blizzard, their homes empty and weathered. Others rebuilt, stronger and wiser. We planted trees along the main street to mark boundaries, to remind ourselves where homes once stood, and to honor the ones the storm claimed. Even the snowbanks, now tame and manageable, carry the memory of that day in their silent shape and pattern. I often wonder what those children would have become, what dreams they would have chased if the storm had been gentle, if the sky had not lied. I carry that question with me, not as despair, but as a promise that we remember them, that their lives and potential are not erased. Memory is the only kind of immortality a blizzard cannot bury. In the evenings, when the last light fades across the prairie, I walk outside, cane in hand, and look toward the horizon. The sky is vast, endless, deceptive. I feel the wind on my face and hear the quiet lessons it carries. I listen, not with fear, but with respect. I understand now that every winter teaches us something about mortality, about courage, about the importance of vigilance. I tell this story because someone must, because future generations must understand what it means to survive, what it means to care, and what it means to remember. Because the sky will lie again, and when it does, someone must be prepared.
I am the last witness of that day, the one who lived to carry the story forward. I have written, spoken, and taught it. I have done all I can. And when my time comes, I hope others will continue. I hope they will remember the children, the teachers, the parents, the town. I hope they will prepare. Because life will always return, and storms will always come. And in the end, the question is simple. Will we listen when the sky speaks again? I have listened, I have remembered, and I have survived.